Strategic Affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching The Gist. A warm welcome to all of viewers who are watching this live, and a welcome to those viewers who will pick up the stream later on our YouTube channel. Our expert for this evening is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, India's former envoy to France. He's the chairman of RIS as well. Evening, Ambassador, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Amitabh. It's good to be back.
Ambassador, very important conversation you were privileged to have with the French defense minister at the Ananta Centre, and we'll be playing out some of those bites. So let me start straight away by talking about Florence Parly and how she said India was central to the Indian Ocean, of course, and to France's and possibly Europe's idea of the Indo-Pacific concept vis-a-vis the American concept. This is what Florence Parly, the French defense minister, had to tell Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Very important points she was bringing up when he asked her about the Indo-Pacific.
That we call the maritime coordinated presence that we tested in the Gulf of Guinea. And we would like to extend this concept of having a maritime coordinated presence to the Indo-Pacific. And as a first example, we are thinking about something in the Indian part of this area, because we see that the Mozambique Channel is a very hot place to be protected. It is a place where terrorist groups are present and could put at risk commercial maritime routes, but also could spread out in other areas in the regions.
Ambassador, the French defense minister talking about future coordination with India and possibly other countries in the Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean region. But if you could just flesh out what she's talking about, why is Mozambique Channel is so important, and she was talking about East Africa and the coast.
I think the first thing to note is that their concept of, or the definition of Indo-Pacific by France tallies very much with ours, which is the eastern shores of Africa to the Pacific, as opposed to the American definition, if you like, which stops at the Indian shores. I think the EU has a much better sense of what is happening in the Indian Ocean, and 80% of trade that European Union does has to go through the Indian Ocean. So they have a much better, shall we say, interest. They have a very profound interest in making sure, first, the maritime safety aspect is taken care of. And I think there she is talking of Mozambique Channel having become a hot spot, basically because there is a threat of Islamic insurgency and terrorism from Mozambique, which affects the Mozambique Channel. And Mozambique Channel is a choke point, along with some other choke points. So that's the first. Second, I think they have, as I said in my interview, I was asking the French defense minister, and I was noting to the audience that they are the only European country, Amitabh, which have physical territories in Indian Ocean. There is no other European country which has it. I have been to the Reunion Islands. It's very interesting. The ambassador in Paris actually has to fly 8 hours to meet his consul general in Reunion. We have a consul general of India in Reunion Islands. Technically, it comes under the jurisdiction of the Indian ambassador in Paris, but you have to fly 8 hours. So we go maybe twice or thrice a year to meet our consul general and see what is going on. But in my 2 or 3 visits that I made to Reunion Islands, what struck me was the strategic importance of Reunion Islands. And the fact that France has got troops stationed in Reunion Islands, the fact that it has got the largest biodiversity in the world, and the fact that it's got a lot of Indian origin people. The French defense minister spoke about 1.6 million citizens. So, all in all, she is using the Mozambique Channel example to emphasize the maritime safety of these sea lanes of communication, without which it'll be very difficult for EU and France to survive, frankly. 80% of trade is not a small amount. It's a big, big amount. So I think that is the importance that she wants to focus on. It's also true that they have French citizens living in Reunion Islands and in Mayotte. So you are also thinking about protecting your citizens. So all in all, these two things: number one, protecting citizens, your own citizens, and secondly, trying to make sure the trade flows are okay and to make sure that maritime safety is protected all over. This makes it, frankly, a country like France, which has a much more existential interest in the Indian Ocean as compared to other countries. And that is what I think makes the minister's statement very significant. I can't hear you, Amitabh.
Beg your pardon, just unmuting myself there, Ambassador. And then when you were talking about specific deals, you also asked about the Rafale, and she had an interesting comment there. Just let's listen into Florence Parlian conversation with Ambassador Mohan Kumar when he asked about the Rafale jets and what is in the future. This is at the Ananta Centre.
There is room for new developments. We, as France, are ready to answer any additional needs or requests that could be made by India. We know that aircraft carrier will be soon delivered. That aircraft are needed. So we are open and ready to provide any other Rafale if this is India's decision.
Ambassador, again, France open and ready to supply any additional Rafale, and she's also talking about the Indigenous Aircraft Carrier, the INS Vikrant, which is going through sea trials as well, and if India needs Rafales for that as well. So specific deals which have been very important in India's strategic armory.
Yes, though I have to set the record straight. No, this was the section in which I was posing questions from the audience to her. And there was one question by a member of the audience who said the Indian Air Force is very happy with Rafale, and therefore, if India were to ask for more, would you be willing? So the minister was really responding to that question. And obviously, she did the right thing, which is if it is India's decision to ask for more Rafale, obviously France will be happy to give it. So that is the response that you would expect. I think what is perhaps interesting is if there are discussions happening, at some point, India would like transfer of technology. And I think we have made it clear to France for some time now that we have to move from a buyer-seller relationship to an investor relationship, invest in Make in India. I think France is acutely aware of this. It cannot always force companies like Dassault, because this is a private company at the end of the day, which makes Rafale. It's not the French government which makes it, but I think France is acutely aware of it. I will also say, to France's credit, that this is perhaps one of the few countries which actually lent us technology to make Scorpion submarines in India. There was the design and technology was from France, and Mazagon docks produced the submarines. So there is some experience of India getting French technology to make in India. So it wouldn't be too difficult for France to do it. But whether it will happen in this particular case, I don't know. But obviously, what happens, Amitabh, with aircrafts and so on, is that the Air Force gets habituated to a particular aircraft, to a particular brand. So, frankly, at some point in the future, the Indian Air Force will need more aircraft. Now, how this will be done, whether it will be procured from France or whether we will make it in India with French help or something else, I don't know. I cannot speculate. But it seems to me that the Indian Air Force will need more aircraft in the future. So that's that's my assessment at least.
Right, and it was interesting that she was pointing out that the Navy might also, I mean, the Navy does need for its aircraft carriers, but she was offering the Rafales if India wanted them, seeing pictures of the Indigenous Aircraft Carrier, one INS Vikrant on its sea trials there. But what's interesting, Ambassador, even post that meeting between the defense ministers and the Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla has also met the DG of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was that Rajnath Singh at a function, the defense minister talked about how India and France were looking at engines for aircraft. Now, we don't know the particulars of that, helicopters, jets. We've been looking for an indigenously developed or transfer of technology of engines for fighters, that will change the game completely in terms of production in India or made in India.
I think you're right. And the defense minister has left no one in doubt. I read a statement by the defense minister of India saying that we have conveyed to our friends, such as France, United States, and others, that we cannot keep on just buying things from you, that some of these things have to be made in India. I think he has made it abundantly clear. That's why I said that France is acutely aware, as are other countries which supply to India, that somehow we have to make that transition from a buyer-seller relationship to an investor, where these countries invest in India so that we can make it in India. I think that is the transition that will happen over time.
Right. Again, I found it interesting. I'm not sure whether this was a question that you had posed or whether it was a question that came from the audience again on AUKUS, and we've seen a lot of developments on that front, on France and the US and France and Australia. This is what Florence had to say when asked about AUKUS.
That we call the maritime coordinated presence that we tested in the Gulf of Guinea. And we would like to extend this concept of having a maritime coordinated presence to the Indo-Pacific. And as a first example, we are thinking about something in the Indian part.
Right. So that was earlier, right? I'm just going to play out what she said on AUKUS.
A very close multilateral relationship with the neighboring countries. Of course, India is at the center of this strategy. We had developed a very good relationship with Australia. Then Australia made its own decision. I will not comment on that. It's, of course, very disappointing for us, but we will continue being a major partner, hopefully, for all countries which want to develop the same strategy in the area.
What's the sense you got on AUKUS? And I'm just going to try and take another question for you, Ambassador. This is from Matara. What is France's view about the Quad, given its current displeasure with Australia vis-a-vis AUKUS?
Okay, so that's a very important question, Amitabh. And I can only give you my sense. I'm not saying that is the correct assessment. My interpretation of what the French defense minister said about AUKUS was interestingly conciliatory, I thought. I thought she said geography is not going to change. She said
Absolutely.
that France continues to be an Indo-Pacific country. And most importantly, she said, we will continue with multilateral cooperation with all countries. And I interpret all countries as countries including Australia, provided they want to cooperate with us and we have the same interest in the region. So I actually thought, and I may be wrong, but I thought she was actually conciliatory, and I thought she is not going to let AUKUS completely change France's perspective on Indo-Pacific. That was my interpretation. Having said that, the question that Matara raised is very interesting about what France's perspective would be vis-a-vis Quad as in the light of what has happened in AUKUS. And my honest answer to that question would be, I think it will encourage France to cooperate even more with Quad. That is my sense, because Quad is a much different entity, shall we say, compared to the AUKUS, where you've got UK and so on. Although Australia is also present in the Quad, but United States is present, Japan is present, and therefore France might actually find it easier to cooperate with Quad. But my point is, I think France and India can provide the hub for cooperative arrangements in the Indian Ocean, not in the Pacific Ocean, because you've got Quad and you've got other countries invested in the Pacific theater. In the Indian Ocean theater, my sense is that France and India can provide the hub around which you can have other countries which wish to cooperate with France and India and which have the same interests as France and India. So I think we are looking at some interesting possibilities. Although my own assessment on the AUKUS is that it will play itself out. I don't think this is going to be permanent, that maybe in a matter of, it may take some time, and I'm not able to tell you whether it is going to be 6 months or 1 year, but I doubt very much that this will hang like a Damocles sword on France for a very, very long time. That is not my sense.
China and Russia have been making a lot of noises about AUKUS. In terms of some of your comments, Anonymous asks, Ambassador, does AUKUS comply with the NPT? If not, does it mark the end of the US-led global nuclear non-proliferation order? And just another point that you had raised about India and France being the hubs in the Indian Ocean. Your enemy says we should allow France military bases in the Andamans and other coastal areas to defend India in the Indo-Pacific from the Chinese. And pretty strongly, she called out the Chinese also in your conversation, right?
Yes, Amitabh. So I will handle the second one first. In terms of in terms of India allowing France to have a presence in Andaman, I'm not able to say, because that's a decision that has to be taken at the highest level. What is interesting is that for the first time in my assessment, India and France did a joint patrol in the Indian Ocean. We normally don't do joint patrols in the Indian Ocean, not even with the United States. And we did it with France. So that for me is interesting. The fact that France and India have a white shipping agreement is interesting, because that involves sharing of information in the Indian Ocean. The fact that France has posted a naval officer in the Information Fusion Center at Gurgaon. Of course, the United States has also posted, so have other countries. But France was the first country to post a naval liaison officer at the Information Fusion Center at Gurgaon. That is significant. So I think short of granting France a base in Andaman Nicobar, we are, I think, doing everything. So Matara says no foreign bases in India. I would largely agree, because the political mood and the public mood is simply not there. But short of that, I think we do have a very, very intense relationship with France. And I think that is something that deserves to be noted. The second point that you raised about, sorry, Amitabh, I missed the first part of your question, actually. I think I handled the second one, but what was the first question? Sorry, you are on mute.
There's a question on whether AUKUS violates the NPT.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. No, I think the answer is no. They will find a way around it because what will happen is the nuclear part of the production will take place not in Australia. It will take place in England or it will take place in the United States and it will be transferred to Australia. So I do not believe that this will lead to a breakdown of the American led proliferation order. That was the question. And I do not believe they will allow that to happen.
Right, and again, there's nothing official about it. We haven't heard officially from either of the two sides. But considering AUKUS, considering where France is at the moment with the US and the UK, there was at least talk about can India approach or can France offer its nuclear parts, some submarines or submarine technology to India, the Barracudas.
I think I can make bold to say that that would be the logical next step. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know, because that will involve very detailed talks and negotiations. Maybe some initial conversation has happened. That's all one can say at this stage, because that will take years and years of negotiations, Amitabh. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if that is the medium term perspective, that we will move towards those kind of submarines that you are talking about. But I do not see that happening immediately. I see conversation having started at most. I'm not in a position to confirm, but conversations could have begun, but it will take quite a bit of time for the conversation to bear fruit.
There's a slightly different question here, which may not fall into the defense domain, but it's a 124 Madness ambassador says, can France improve India's standing in the EU, where Pakistan lobbies foster false propaganda and the EU advocates the Pakistan industry like textiles when terrorists attack their interests? There's a lot of strands in that, but you get the general gist.
Yes, I think I know the question. I think the question is being asked about Pakistan's GSP plus status in the EU, where Pakistan is entitled to GSP plus status despite its record as a country which fosters cross border terrorism. I think the EU is aware of the stakes in Pakistan. And I think the EU is well informed. Not only do we inform them, but also countries friendly to India, such as France, definitely do that. I think the dilemma for EU is whether you want a state like Pakistan to collapse for economic reasons. And I think the fear is if you deprive them of GSP plus, their economic situation might become so bad that then you have a different kind of situation. A Pakistan which is economically much weaker or faces tremendous problems of poverty could be conceivably looked at as a state that is much more dangerous than a state which is relatively better off, and at least people have a certain degree of economic prosperity. There are enough people in EU who believe that. I don't necessarily say that they are against India or they consider or they're tolerant of Pakistani terrorism and so on. That would be wrong. But there are genuinely people in the EU who fear a collapse of Pakistani economy, if you know what I mean. So that is something on which we have conversations with EU. Whether France will be able to completely persuade everybody in the EU, I don't know. But I know that enough conversations are happening on that issue.
You were talking about the Barracudas as the next logical steps. A couple of strands in terms of questions and comments. One from Bruce Wayne. Do you think the US and NATO allies will object if there's a technology transfer for nuclear powered submarines? And also, the whole Russia angle, how India has been dependent on nuclear powered submarines from Russia, and how India is trying to diversify its strategic platforms.
So, Amitabh, this will depend on the strategic scenario in the Indian Ocean as it unfolds over the next 5 to 10 years. That's why I'm saying this is for the medium term. Look at it like this. Let's say 5 years from now, and I'm speculating. I know I'm speculating. So let's assume that China becomes such a big threat in the Indian Ocean, because bear in mind that China's objectives with regard to its navy is to become dominant in the Pacific theater and to have a permanent presence in the Indian Ocean theater. If that becomes true, then I do not see such a thing happening without consultations with United States. We wouldn't do a thing like this without consulting all our friends and allies. And my assessment is actually the United States may very well encourage this kind of Franco-Indian cooperation in the Indian Ocean because it is in their interest. And the United States can focus on the Pacific theater where they have much bigger interests in terms of combating China, and leave the Indian Ocean for cooperation between France and India. This is something I have been arguing. In my own speeches, I have been saying it is not possible for the Quad to be invested everywhere equally. The Quad will do some things, but in terms of security and strategy, it will focus more on the Pacific theater because of the United States, Japan, and Australia. So we will need some independent structure in the Indian Ocean. And I feel strongly that the best partner for India in the Indian Ocean theater is France. And that is why in my conversation with the French defense minister, I was very comforted when, and this is not my language, it is the French embassy which put out a release which said the centrality of India. And that is why I caught on to that expression. And I wanted to draw out the minister by asking her what she meant by centrality of India. And at least 2 or 3 times in the conversation that she had with me, she kept on saying, India has to be at the center of the Indo-Pacific strategy. This should be music to our ears. And I think we should do our very best to sit with France, which I'm doing. Bear in mind, we have now a strategic dialogue, which is annual at the level of national security advisors. We have a maritime dialogue at the level of deputy national security advisors. And we have an annual defense dialogue at the level of defense minister. There are at least 3 parallel dialogues every year with France. And frankly, I don't think we have such a dialogue, maybe with the United States. But other than that, I don't see us having this kind of a dialogue with many countries in the world. So I think we have enough occasions and opportunities to discuss with France how to deal with Indian Ocean, because as China keeps expanding its permanent presence in the Indian Ocean, the stakes for India becomes that much higher, if you know what I mean. It becomes absolutely vital for India to keep the sea lanes of communication open, to get vital intelligence about what's going on. And that's why I think the Information Fusion Center at Gurgaon is very, very useful. And lastly, what happens if there are man-made disasters, if there are climate change disasters, if there are oil spills, if there is a terrorist incident, what happens? Who responds? Who is the first responder? I would like France and India to be the first responder, frankly. So this is something I think we will have to look at much more carefully. I believe that it's only for the last 4 or 5, the first maritime dialogue, for example, was only in 2016 between France and India. But now we've had 5 such dialogues. So I think there is a sense in both France and India that the Indian Ocean theater will be the perfect theater for cooperation between the 2 countries, because the Pacific theater is important anyway, and there are lots of countries which are invested in it. But the Indian Ocean theater, for me, will really define the limits of cooperation between France and India.
There are some comments, why just focus on security, FTA, etc., etc. But I specifically focused on just defense and security ties because of this visit. Of course, there are multi-dimensions that we would have to deal with in separate programs. I just want to take, I was going to ask you to wrap up, Ambassador, and sum up why France is such a dependable strategic partner of India. But you've done that perfectly in your last answer. Just going to take a comment from Sai Prasad Vishwarathan, who says India is boldly working on personal interest first. India is finally taking the lead in foreign policy and strategic affairs. Ambassador Mohan highlighted all the essential details perfectly. So thanks for that, Ambassador, from our viewers, and thanks from me personally and StratNews as well for this conversation.
Thanks, Amitabh. Good to see you. Thank you. Take care.
It's been a great pleasure. And to all those viewers who participated in this conversation, whether it's on a live chat with your questions and comments, I hope I managed to take a majority of them. And for those who will watch this later, thank you for that. And just going to take some requests that have been coming in for a UPI payment ID to help contribute and support StratNews Global. Just putting that on the screen. It's always there in the YouTube descriptor as well. This is The Gist on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.